Have you ever found yourself facing insurmountable odds? A challenge so great it seemed impossible to overcome? Well, that's exactly what King Hezekiah of Judah faced when the mighty Assyrian army came knocking at his door. But here's the thing. Hezekiah had a secret weapon that the Assyrians never saw coming. In the pages of the Bible, we find the story of a king who stood out from the rest. His name was Hezekiah, and he ruled over the kingdom of Judah. But what made Hezekiah so special? You see, Hezekiah wasn't like other kings who came before him. He had a deep love for God that guided his every action. Even though he lived in a time when many people had turned away from God, Hezekiah remained faithful. He trusted in the Lord completely, and that trust shaped the course of his life and his reign. The Bible tells us that Hezekiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, so 2 Kings 18:3. He removed the pagan shrines and idols that had cropped up throughout the land, tearing them down and smashing them to pieces. He restored the temple in Jerusalem, which had fallen into disrepair, and he encouraged the people to return to worshiping the one true God. But Hezekiah's devotion to God went beyond just religious reforms. He sought to follow God's commands in every aspect of his life. He was a king who ruled with justice and compassion, caring for the needs of his people. And because of his faithfulness, God blessed him with success in all his endeavors. Biblical scholars note that Hezekiah's reign marked a turning point in the history of Judah. He came to the throne during a time of great turmoil, when the Assyrian Empire was expanding its reach and threatening to conquer the smaller kingdoms of the Near East. But through his trust in God and his wise leadership, Hezekiah was able to navigate these treacherous waters and keep his kingdom safe. But then, trouble came knocking. As Hezekiah settled into his reign, a new danger was brewing on the horizon. The Assyrian Empire, a powerful and ruthless nation, had set its sights on the kingdoms of the Near East. Led by their king, Sennacherib, the Assyrians had already conquered many of the surrounding nations, and now they were marching towards Judah. The Bible tells us that the Assyrians came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. 2 Kings 18:13. One by one, the cities fell to the Assyrian army until only Jerusalem remained standing. It was a dire situation, and Hezekiah knew that his kingdom was in grave danger. But the Assyrians weren't content with just conquering Judah's cities. They wanted to break the spirit of the people and force them into submission. Sennacherib sent his messengers to Jerusalem, bearing a message of intimidation and fear. They stood outside the city walls and shouted to the people, mocking their God and their king. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you," they said. "He cannot deliver you from my hand. Make peace with me and come out to me, and every one of you will eat from his own vine and fig tree, and drink water from his own cistern." 2 Kings 18 verses 31 to 32. These were tempting words, designed to sow doubt and discord among the people of Jerusalem. The Assyrians promised peace and prosperity, but Hezekiah knew that their words were empty. He had seen what happened to the other nations that had surrendered to Assyria. They were crushed under the weight of heavy tributes and forced labor. Hezekiah's officials were at a loss for what to do. They knew that they couldn't match the military might of the Assyrians, and they feared that the people would lose heart and surrender. But Hezekiah remained steadfast in his faith. He turned to the prophet Isaiah for guidance, seeking the wisdom of God. Isaiah's message was clear. "Do not be afraid of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land." 2 Kings 19 verses 6 to 7. It was a bold prophecy, but Hezekiah trusted in the word of the Lord. He knew that God had the power to deliver his people, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And so, he prepared for the siege, strengthening the city's defenses and encouraging the people to put their faith in God. Now, here's where things get interesting. As the Assyrian army stood at the gates of Jerusalem, mocking and threatening the people of God, it might have seemed like all hope was lost. But what the Assyrians didn't realize was that they were not just fighting against Hezekiah and his army. They were fighting against the sovereign power of God himself. The Bible makes it clear that God is in control of all things, even the rise and fall of nations. And in the case of the Assyrians, God had a plan that would demonstrate his power and glory in a way that no one could ignore. You see, the Assyrian king Sennacherib had made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance and pride, he had blasphemed against the Lord, mocking his power and claiming that no God could stand against him. He had even gone so far as to compare himself to the gods of other nations, saying, "Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand?" 2 Kings 18:35. But what Sennacherib didn't realize was that he was just a pawn in God's grand plan. The Lord had allowed him to conquer the other nations as a way of demonstrating his judgment against their idolatry and disobedience. But when it came to Jerusalem, God had made a promise to protect his people and to preserve the line of David, from which the Messiah would one day come. This promise was not based on the righteousness of the people of Jerusalem, but on God's covenant with David. As the Lord had said to David, "Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever." 2 Samuel 7:16. And now, in the face of the Assyrian threat, God was ready to fulfill that promise in a powerful way. You see, the events of this story demonstrate God's sovereignty over all the nations of the earth. Even the greatest empires and the most powerful rulers are subject to his will and his purposes. And when God makes a promise, he always keeps it, no matter how impossible the circumstances may seem. In the case of Jerusalem, God's protection was not just a matter of military strategy or political alliances. It was a supernatural intervention, a demonstration of his power and his faithfulness to his people. And it was a reminder that no matter how dark the situation may seem, God is always in control, working out his perfect plan for the redemption of the world. But God didn't just protect Jerusalem, he also provided for them. He gave Hezekiah a sign that there would be abundance in the land. And not only that, but he promised that a remnant of Judah would survive and thrive, carrying on God's plan for his people. So picture this. The Assyrian army is camped outside Jerusalem, ready to strike. 185,000 soldiers, armed to the teeth, just waiting for the signal to attack. But then, something incredible happens. The Bible tells us that on the night before the Assyrians were set to attack Jerusalem, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 soldiers in the Assyrian camp. 2 Kings 19:35. It's hard to imagine the scale of this event. The Assyrian army was one of the most powerful military forces in the ancient world, known for their brutality and their ability to conquer even the strongest of cities. And yet, in a single night, nearly 200,000 of their soldiers were killed by a single angel. The Bible doesn't give us many details about how this happened. Some scholars speculate that it may have been a plague or some other natural disaster that struck the Assyrian camp. But the Bible is clear that this was no ordinary event. It was a direct intervention by God himself through the power of his angel. The death of so many soldiers must have been a shocking and terrifying sight. The Assyrian survivors would have woken up to find their comrades lying dead all around them, with no clear explanation for what had happened. It must have been a moment of utter confusion and fear as they realized that they were facing a power far greater than their own. But the story doesn't end there. The Bible goes on to tell us that when Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, returned home to Nineveh, he was assassinated by his own sons while he was worshipping in the temple of his God. 2 Kings 19:37. it was a fitting end for a man who had blasphemed against the Lord and sought to destroy his people. For the people of Jerusalem, the events of that night must have been a powerful confirmation of God's love and protection. They had faced an impossible situation with no hope of victory in sight, and yet God had intervened on their behalf in a way that no one could have predicted. And the same is true for us today. We may not face an invading army or a murderous king, but we all face challenges and obstacles in our lives that can seem insurmountable. We may feel like we are up against impossible odds, with no way out. But the story of Hezekiah reminds us that we serve a God who is sovereign over all things, and who is able to intervene on our behalf in ways that we cannot even imagine. Just as the angel of the Lord struck down the Assyrian army, so too can God move in our lives to bring about his purposes and his plans. This doesn't mean that we will always be spared from suffering or hardship, but it does mean that we can trust in God's love and faithfulness, even in the darkest of times. We can know that he is with us, and that he is working all things together for our good and his glory. So, what can we learn from this incredible story? First and foremost, we see the power of trusting in God. Hezekiah put his faith in the Lord, and God came through in a big way. He protected his people and provided for them, just as he promised. But we also see the danger of pride and arrogance. Sennacherib thought he was untouchable, but he found out the hard way that no one can stand against the might of God. In the end, this story is a testament to God's sovereignty and his faithfulness to his people. No matter how dire the circumstances may seem, we can always find hope and strength in him. So, what about you? Have you ever faced a situation that seemed hopeless? Remember, just like Hezekiah, you have a secret weapon, the power of God on your side. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you want to explore more inspiring Bible stories like this one, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.